Bear cub was tied to railroad tracks with a train approaching. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The old tracks stretch through the forest like a scar across the earth. Nobody used them much anymore, not since the copper mine shut down 3 years ago. But tonight, the rails shook. A freight train was coming through. Inside the weathered cabin that sat 50 yards from the tracks, baby Milo played with his wooden blocks. His parents had brought him here for their first vacation together since he was born. The cabin belonged to his grandfather, who used to work the mines before they closed. Milo's mother, Sarah, stirred soup on the wood stove. His father, David, had stepped outside to gather more firewood. The baby gurgled happily, stacking one block on top of another. Then he heard it, a sound that made his tiny hands freeze. Not the distant rumble of the train, which grew louder each second. Something else. Something closer. A whimper. High-pitched and desperate. Milo's round eyes turned toward the window. The sound came again, more urgent now. He dropped his blocks and crawled toward the cabin door, which David had left slightly open. Outside, near the tracks, something moved in the darkness. 2 men stood there, their faces hidden by shadows. Between them, a small shape struggled against thick rope. A bear cub, no bigger than a large dog. Its black fur caught the moonlight as it twisted and pulled, trying to break free. The men had tied it to the railroad tracks with heavy rope, the kind used for hauling equipment. "Should teach these animals to stay out of our camps," one man said. His voice carried on the wind. The other laughed. "Train'll be here in 5 minutes, maybe less." The cub cried out again, a sound so full of fear that even baby Milo understood it. The infant pushed against the door, making it creak open wider. Sarah looked up from the stove. "Milo! Sweetie, stay away from the door." But Milo had already squeezed through the opening. His chubby legs moved faster than Sarah had ever seen them move. She dropped her spoon, soup splashing on the floor. "David!" she called out. But her husband was somewhere in the dark forest, gathering wood. The train's whistle screamed through the night. Closer now. Much closer. On the tracks, the bear cub's struggles grew frantic. It had rubbed its paws raw against the rope. Blood spotted its dark fur. The 2 men stepped back, watching with cold satisfaction. Then they saw the baby. Milo crawled straight toward the tracks, his pajamas catching on twigs and stones. He made soft cooing sounds, the same ones he made when he wanted to comfort someone. "What the hell?" One of the men pointed. "There's a kid." The other man started forward, then stopped. The train's headlight had appeared through the trees, a bright eye cutting through the darkness. The bear cub saw Milo, too. For a moment, it stopped struggling. Their eyes met, the frightened animal and the determined infant. Milo reached the edge of the gravel that lined the tracks. The vibrations from the approaching train shook the ground beneath his hands. The men stood frozen, torn between grabbing the baby and running from the scene. From deep in the forest came another sound, a roar that made everyone's blood run cold. The mother bear had found them. She burst from the tree line like a dark avalanche, 400 pounds of rage and protective fury. Her eyes locked on her tied cub, then swept to the men who had done this. The train's whistle shrieked again, 30 seconds away now, maybe less. Milo kept crawling. His tiny fingers reached for the rope that held the cub. The mother bear saw him, this small human moving toward her baby. She paused, confused. Humans had tied her cub, but this one was trying to help. "Get the kid!" one man shouted to the other. but neither moved. The mother bear stood between them and the tracks now, her massive form blocking their path. Her lips pulled back, showing teeth that could crush bone. Milo's fingers found the rope. He pulled at it with all the strength in his small body. The knot was tight, tied by adult hands, but something about the baby's touch made the cub stop panicking. It held still, watching him. The train rounded the final curve. Its headlight flooded the scene in harsh white light. The engineer saw the shapes on the tracks and pulled the emergency brake, but it was too late. Thousands of tons of steel couldn't stop in time. Sarah reached the cabin door, saw her baby at the tracks, saw the bear, saw the train. Her scream pierced the night. The mother bear made her choice. She bounded toward the tracks, not to attack, but to help. Her powerful jaws closed on the rope near where Milo pulled. Together, the baby with his tiny hands and the bear with her massive strength, they pulled at the bonds. The rope began to fray. The cub felt it loosening and renewed its struggles. The men backed away, suddenly understanding they had done something unforgivable. 20 yards. The train's brakes screamed against the rails, throwing sparks into the night. 15 yards, 10. The rope snapped. The cub tumbled free, rolling away from the tracks. The mother bear grabbed it in her jaws, gentle despite her size. But Milo was still there, his hands where the rope had been. Sarah ran faster than she thought possible. David appeared from the forest, saw everything in one horrible instant, and sprinted toward his son. 5 yards. The mother bear did something then that none of them would ever forget. She dropped her cub, lunged forward, and scooped Milo up with one massive paw. Not to hurt him, to save him. She pulled him back just as the train thundered past, missing them by inches. The wind from its passage knocked Sarah to her knees. David skidded to a stop, his heart hammering. The 2 men who had tied the cub were already running, crashing through the forest like the cowards they were. When the train had passed, when the terrible noise faded to distant rumbling, they found the mother bear sitting in the gravel. Milo sat in front of her, unharmed, reaching up to touch her massive face. The cub huddled against its mother's side, shaking but alive. Sarah sobbed as she scooped up her baby. David stood guard, unsure what the bear would do, but the great animal simply looked at them with eyes that seemed almost human in their understanding. Then she picked up her cub and walked into the forest. Before disappearing into the shadows, she turned back once. The look she gave them said everything. "Thank you. We are even. Your cub saved mine, I saved yours." Milo waved his tiny hand at the bears as they vanished into the darkness. He gurgled happily, as if the whole thing had been a grand adventure. Sarah held him tight, her tears soaking his pajamas. David wrapped his arms around them both. They stood there by the empty tracks, understanding they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would change how they saw the world. In the cabin, the soup had boiled over, filling the air with the smell of burned vegetables. None of them cared. They had their baby. He was safe. And somewhere in the forest, a mother bear was reunited with her cub, both of them alive because a human infant had crawled toward danger with nothing but love in his heart. The tracks gleamed empty in the moonlight. The train was gone. The men were gone. But the memory of what happened there would last forever. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. Her hands trembled as she carried Milo back to the cabin, David's arms steady around her shoulders. The baby seemed completely unfazed, reaching back toward the forest where the bears had disappeared, making soft babbling sounds. "Did that really happen?" Sarah whispered. Her voice cracked. "Did a bear just save our baby?" David's jaw was tight. He kept glancing back at the tracks, then at the forest. Those men. I saw their faces when the train's light hit them. I know them. Sarah's head snapped up. What? Tom Garrett and Jake Wilkins. They work at the hardware store in town. Always talking about how the wildlife around here is getting too bold, coming too close to town. David's voice hardened. Never thought they'd do something like this. Inside the cabin, Sarah sank into the old rocking chair, still clutching Milo. The baby yawned, his adventure apparently exhausting. David checked the locks on the door, then the windows. The soup had burned black on the stove, filling the room with acrid smoke. "We have to tell someone," Sarah said. "The police, the ranger station, someone." "Tell them what?" David ran his hands through his hair. "That we saw two men tie a bear cub to railroad tracks? That our 10-month-old baby crawled out there to save it? That the mother bear helped rescue both of them?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They'll think we're crazy." Milo had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, his little fist curled against her chest. In the dim lamplight, she could see dirt on his pajamas, tiny scratches on his palms from crawling over rough ground. Evidence that it had all been real. "The tracks," she said suddenly. "There might still be rope. Evidence." David grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." "No." Sarah stood, shifting Milo in her arms. "We're not separating. Not after what just happened." They went together, Sarah carrying the sleeping baby, David holding the flashlight like a weapon. The forest seemed different now, full of watching eyes and hidden dangers. Every shadow could hide those men, coming back to make sure there were no witnesses. At the tracks, David's flashlight beam swept over the gravel. There it was, torn rope, dark with what looked like blood, bear blood. He knelt, careful not to disturb it. "We need to—" He stopped, listened. "Did you hear that?" Sarah heard it too. Footsteps in the underbrush. Heavy breathing. Not animal, human. David clicked off the flashlight, pulling Sarah behind a large pine tree. They pressed against the rough bark, hardly daring to breathe. Milo stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. Two figures emerged from the forest. Tom Garrett and Jake Wilkins, just as David had said. They carried shovels and a canister of something, gasoline from the smell. "Should be right here," Tom's voice was nervous. "We need to get rid of the evidence." "Still can't believe that baby," Jake muttered. "And the bear. Never seen anything like it." "Doesn't matter. We clean this up. No one ever knows. That family in the cabin, they were inside. Probably didn't see anything." They started scooping up the torn rope, the bloodied gravel. Jake poured gasoline over the spot where the cub had been tied. Sarah felt David tense beside her. She knew what he was thinking. These men were destroying evidence. But if they confronted them now, here in the dark, with Milo in her arms— A branch snapped under David's foot. Both men spun around. Tom raised his shovel like a weapon. "Who's there?" David stepped out, keeping Sarah and Milo behind him. "It's over, Tom. We saw everything." Jake's face went pale in the moonlight. "David? Man, you don't understand. We weren't really going to— You tied a baby bear to railroad tracks." David's voice was steady, controlled. "We watched you do it. Our son almost died trying to save it." Tom took a step forward. The gasoline can sloshed in Jake's hand. "Now, hold on. No one needs to know about this. We could make it worth your while." "Are you trying to bribe me?" David laughed, short and harsh. "After you almost killed my son, your son was never supposed to be there." Tom's voice rose. "This was just about teaching those bears a lesson. They killed 3 chickens last week, destroyed my nephew's beehives. So you decided to murder a cub?" Sarah stepped out from behind David, Milo still sleeping in her arms. "What kind of people are you?" Jake looked sick. He set down the gas can, hands shaking. "Tom, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Tom's grip tightened on the shovel. "We're not going to prison because some bears got too close to town." That's when they heard it. A low growl from the forest. Then another, and another. The mother bear emerged first, her cub beside her. But she wasn't alone. 2 more adult bears flanked her, massive shapes in the darkness. They formed a semicircle, eyes glowing in the moonlight. Tom raised the shovel higher. "Stay back. David, Sarah, get behind us." But the bears weren't looking at David's family. Their eyes were fixed on Tom and Jake, the men who had hurt one of their cubs. "Don't move," David whispered. "Nobody move." Milo chose that moment to wake up. He saw the bears and, instead of crying, reached out his chubby arms toward them. He made the same cooing sound he'd made before, the one that seemed to say, "Friend." The mother bear's ears pricked forward. She took a step closer, but not threateningly. Her eyes moved from Milo to Tom, back to Milo, as if showing the difference between friend and enemy. Jake dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. We didn't mean for it to go this far." Tom tried to back away, but his foot hit the railroad tracks. He stumbled, the shovel flying from his hands. The bears moved closer, cutting off any escape route. "Please," Sarah said softly. Not to the men, to the bears. "We saw what they did. We'll make sure they answer for it. Please." The mother bear looked at her. At Milo, who was still reaching out, still making friendly sounds. Something passed between them, mother to mother, protector to protector. The bear turned and walked back into the forest. The others followed, melting into the shadows, but their message was clear. "We're watching. Justice will be done." Tom collapsed against the rails, all fight gone out of him. Jake was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Jake kept saying. "We just wanted to scare them off." David pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff and the rangers, and anyone else who will listen." While they waited, Sarah sat on a fallen log, rocking Milo gently. The baby was wide awake now, staring at the forest with bright, curious eyes. Every few minutes, he'd wave his little hand, as if saying goodbye to friends only he could see. The sheriff arrived first, followed by 2 ranger vehicles. David and Sarah told their story, showed them the evidence Tom and Jake hadn't managed to destroy. The men confessed everything, Jake sobbing through his statement, Tom sullen and silent. "Never seen anything like it," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "Bears don't usually, but then parents protecting their young, human or animal." He trailed off, looking at Milo. "That's one special boy you've got there." As the police cars pulled away with Tom and Jake in custody, Ranger Maria Fernandez stayed behind. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "The bears in this area," she said carefully. "They're not ordinary. There've been stories for years. Bears that show unusual intelligence, unusual compassion. The indigenous people who lived here first, they had legends about spirit bears that could bridge the gap between human and animal." Sarah held Milo tighter. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying your son did something remarkable tonight. Something that might have consequences we don't fully understand yet." Maria looked toward the forest. "Those bears will remember. They always do." Back in the cabin, David boarded up the broken window. When had that happened? While Sarah gave Milo a bath. The baby splashed happily, seemingly unaware of how close he'd come to disaster. "We can't stay here," Sarah said quietly. Not after tonight. David nodded. I'll pack the car. We can be home by morning. But as Sarah lifted Milo from the tub, she noticed something. On his left palm, where he'd touched the rope that bound the cub, was a mark. Not a cut or bruise, but something else. A pattern in his skin that looked almost like a paw print. She showed David. He examined it under the lamp, frowning. It's not a wound. It's like it's always been there. They looked at each other, then at their son, who was yawning again, ready for sleep. What had happened tonight? What had their baby become part of? Outside, just beyond the reach of the cabin's lights, eyes watched from the forest. Not threatening. Protective. A mother bear settled down with her cub, but her attention never wavered from the small human dwelling. The bond had been formed, the debt acknowledged. And in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, the old stories were writing a new chapter. Sarah nursed Milo one last time before bed, David double-checking every lock and window. They'd leave at first light, go back to their ordinary life in the city. But all three of them knew nothing would ever be ordinary again. The mark on Milo's palm seemed to pulse gently in the lamplight. Sarah kissed it, then kissed her son's forehead. Whatever came next, whatever this meant, they'd face it together. In the forest, the bears kept watch, and in the cabin, a very special baby slept peacefully. Dreams full of fur and friendship, and the wild magic that still lived in the deep places of the world. Dawn was still hours away when the real strangeness began. Sarah woke to the sound of Milo giggling. Not crying, not fussing, giggling. At 3 a.m. She rolled over, reaching for the bedside lamp. The cabin was pitch black, the kind of darkness that only existed far from city lights. "David?" She nudged her husband. He mumbled something and turned over. The giggling came again, followed by what sounded like purring? No, that wasn't right. Bears didn't purr. Sarah sat up, heart already racing. The crib was across the room, placed there after they'd decided to delay their departure until morning. Too exhausted, too shaken to drive through mountain roads in the dark. She grabbed the flashlight they'd left on the nightstand and clicked it on. The beam swept across the room to Milo's crib. Her breath caught. Milo was sitting up, something he'd only started doing recently. But that wasn't what made Sarah's blood run cold. There was something in the crib with him, something small and dark and furry. David. This time she shook him hard. "David, wake up!" He jerked awake, instantly alert. "What? What's wrong?" Sarah pointed the flashlight at the crib. David scrambled for his glasses, then froze. The bear cub, the same one from the railroad tracks, was in their son's crib. Milo was petting it gently, the cub nuzzling against his small hand. The mark on his palm seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. "How did it?" David started, then stopped. The window was intact. The door was still locked. He'd checked everything twice before bed. They approached the crib slowly, afraid any sudden movement might startle the cub. But the small bear just looked at them with calm, almost human eyes. Milo reached for his mother, making happy sounds. "Mama, fweend!" Sarah's heart stopped. Those were words, real words. Milo had said maybe 5 words total in his 10 months of life, but this came out clear, deliberate. "Did he just?" David whispered. Milo pointed at the cub. "Fweend, come play." The cub made a soft wuffing sound, then climbed out of the crib with surprising grace. It padded across the floor to the cabin door, looked back at Milo, then at the door again. "I think it wants us to follow," David said, voice barely above a whisper. "We're not taking our baby outside in the middle of the night to follow a bear," Sarah said firmly. But even as she spoke, she saw the mark on Milo's palm pulse with soft light. The baby reached toward the door, toward the cub. "Out! Go out!" Milo's voice was clearer than they'd ever heard it. "Ween's waiting." Against every parental instinct, against all logic, they bundled Milo in warm clothes. David grabbed the flashlight and a baseball bat he'd found in the cabin's closet. Sarah held Milo tight, the baby squirming with excitement. The moment David opened the door, the cub bounded out. But it didn't go far, just to the edge of the porch, where it sat and waited. The forest was alive with sounds Sarah had never noticed before. Not threatening sounds, whispers, like conversations just beyond hearing. The mark on Milo's hand glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with something Sarah couldn't identify. The cub led them down a path Sarah hadn't seen in daylight. The trail wound between massive trees, their trunks so wide it would take 4 people holding hands to circle them. Moss hung like curtains, and somewhere in the distance, water bubbled over rocks. "This is insane," David muttered, but he kept walking. They'd gone maybe 100 yards when the forest opened into a clearing. Sarah gasped. Bears. At least a dozen of them, arranged in a rough circle. But they weren't acting like wild animals. They sat upright, almost formal, their eyes all turned toward the center of the clearing. In that center stood the mother bear from the railroad tracks, and beside her, "That's impossible," David breathed. A woman stood next to the bear. Not just any woman. She was dressed in clothes that seemed to be made of leaves and moss, her hair long and dark with streaks of silver. Her feet were bare, and her eyes were exactly like the mother bear's. "Welcome," the woman said. Her voice sounded like wind through pine branches. "We've been waiting for you." Sarah clutched Milo tighter. The baby wasn't frightened at all. He was reaching toward the woman, babbling excitedly. "Who are you?" David stepped partially in front of his family, the bat ready. "What is this?" The woman smiled. It was a sad smile, heavy with old grief. "My name is Ilara. Long ago I was like you, human, mother, until the night my child was taken." She moved closer, and Sarah saw that her movements were too fluid, too graceful to be entirely human. The bears watched silently, their eyes never leaving the family. "Taken by whom?" Sarah found her voice. "By men who thought the forest belonged to them, who saw my daughter playing with bear cubs and called her cursed. They tied her to these very railroad tracks 100 years before trains ran here. Left her for the wolves." Sarah felt sick. The parallel to tonight was too clear. "But the bears saved her," Ilara continued. "Just as your son tried to save this cub. The forest remembers acts of pure heart. It rewards them. And sometimes," she looked at Milo with those strange animal eyes, "sometimes it claims them." "Claims?" David's knuckles were white on the bat. "What do you mean, claims?" Ilara gestured to the bears around them. Each of these was once human. Each chose compassion over fear, love over hatred. The forest gave them new forms, new purposes, guardians of the boundary between worlds. Sarah's mind reeled. "You're saying these bears are people?" "Were people," Ilara corrected. "Now they're more and less. They protect the innocent, punish the cruel. They remember every kindness, every cruelty done in these woods." Milo had been quiet, watching with those bright baby eyes. Now he spoke again, voice clear as mountain water. "Want to help? Want to protect?" Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Her 10-month-old son was speaking in complete sentences. The mark on his palm was glowing steadily now, warm against her chest where she held him. "The mark," Ilara said, noticing Sarah's distress. "It's not a curse, it's a choice. When he's older, when he understands, he can choose. Stay in your world or join ours. Until then, he'll be able to walk between both." "No." Sarah's voice was fierce. "He's a baby. He's my baby. You can't have him." Ilara's expression softened. "I was a mother too. I would never take a child from its parents. But the forest has marked him now. He'll see things others don't, understand things others can't. And when the innocent are in danger, when cruelty threatens the small and helpless, he'll know." The mother bear moved forward, nuzzling gently against Milo's hanging foot. The baby laughed, that pure sound of joy only very young children can make. "Why show us this?" David asked. "Why not just let us leave?" "Because Tom Garrett and Jake Wilkins weren't the first," Ilara said, and her voice hardened. "And they won't be the last. The cruelty is growing. The disconnect between your kind and mine. More animals tied to tracks. More cubs orphaned. More forests burned for spite." She waved her hand, and the air shimmered. Images formed like smoke. Animals in traps. Trees cut down with baby birds still in nests. Streams poisoned by illegal dumping. Sarah turned Milo's face away, but the baby had already seen. His expression was too old, too knowing for 10 months. "He'll be a bridge," Ilara continued, "between your world and ours. There are others like him, marked children who grew up to be protectors, park rangers who always know where poachers set traps, veterinarians who can calm any animal, teachers who inspire the next generation to care." The cub had climbed into David's arms somehow, and he held it awkwardly, like it might explode. It just yawned, showing tiny teeth, and settled against his chest. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly. "We can't pretend this didn't happen." "Now you go home," Ilara said simply. "Raise your son, love him, teach him kindness, though he seems to know it already. The forest will call when it needs him, and he'll answer, because that's who he is." She stepped back, and the watching bears stirred. One by one, they stood and padded into the forest. The mother bear was the last to go, brushing against Sarah's leg as she passed. The touch was warm, comforting, mother to mother. "Wait," David called out. "Will we see you again?" Ilara was already fading, becoming one with the shadows between trees. "When the forest nags you, when your son is ready, when the cruel ones threaten the innocent again." Her voice was just wind now. "We'll be watching, always watching." The clearing was empty, except for the 3 of them and the cub in David's arms. The little bear looked up at him with 2 intelligent eyes, then squirmed to get down. It scampered a few feet away, looked back, and waited. They followed it back to the cabin in silence. Sarah's mind churned with questions, fears, impossibilities. David kept shaking his head like he was trying to wake from a dream. Only Milo seemed peaceful, finally drowsing against his mother's shoulder. At the cabin door, the cub stopped. It stood on its hind legs, reached up with one paw, and touched Milo's hanging hand. The mark on the baby's palm flared bright, then faded to a soft, steady glow. The cub made a sound, not quite animal, not quite human, and bounded back into the forest. This time, Sarah knew it wouldn't return tonight. Inside, they tucked Milo back in his crib. The baby was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. The mark on his palm had faded to look almost normal. Just a peculiar birthmark shaped like a bear's paw. Sarah and David sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around cups of coffee neither of them could drink. "Did that really happen?" David finally asked. Sarah reached over and lifted his shirt. 3 parallel scratches ran down his chest, from the cub climbing on him. They were already healing, but they were real. "Yeah," she whispered. "It did." They sat in silence until dawn painted the sky pink and gold. Neither of them slept. How could they? Their baby had been marked by ancient forest magic. Their son would grow up to be, what? A guardian? A bridge between worlds? As the first birds began to sing, Sarah made a decision. "We go home. We raise him normally. We don't tell anyone about tonight." David nodded. "And when the forest calls?" Sarah looked at their sleeping son, at the faint mark on his palm. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." They packed the car as the sun climbed higher. The cabin looked ordinary in daylight, just a rustic vacation rental in need of some repairs. The railroad tracks were just old metal rails running through the forest. Everything normal. Everything changed. As David started the car, Sarah saw movement at the forest edge. Not bears this time, other animals. A doe with her fawn, a family of raccoons, a great horned owl that should have been sleeping, all watching, all knowing. Milo woke as they pulled away, twisting in his car seat to look back at the cabin, at the forest. "Bye-bye, Weens," he said clearly. Then, as if exhausted by so much talking, he stuck his thumb in his mouth and fell back asleep. The drive home was quiet except for the radio playing softly. Sarah kept checking the rearview mirror, but the forest looked like any other. Dark trees and morning mist. Beautiful, normal, full of secrets. They were 3 hours from home when Milo spoke again, his voice drowsy but clear. "They need us, Mama. The sad ones, the hurt ones. We have to help." Sarah met David's eyes in the mirror. He nodded slightly. Whatever came next, whatever their son would become, they'd face it together. The mark of the forest was on their child, and someday the forest would call. But for now, they were just a family driving home from vacation, their baby sleeping peacefully in the back seat, his palm still warm with the memory of magic. The city skyline appeared on the horizon, concrete and glass and ordinary life. Sarah reached back to touch Milo's foot, needing the contact. He stirred, smiled in his sleep, and the mark on his palm pulsed once with gentle light. Not a curse, Hilara had said. A gift, a responsibility, a destiny. Sarah squeezed David's hand on the gear shift. Whatever that destiny was, it had already begun. 3 months passed. 3 months of pretending everything was normal. 3 months of watching their son for signs of, what? Magic? Destiny? At first, nothing seemed different. Milo went back to being a regular baby, fussing when hungry, crying when tired, playing with his blocks and stuffed animals. The mark on his palm faded until it looked like nothing more than an odd birthmark. Sarah almost convinced herself they'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. Then came the incidents. It started small. The neighbor's cat, notorious for scratching anyone who came near, would curl up in Milo's lap during backyard picnics. Birds landed on his stroller during walks, staying even when other children ran past. At the pediatrician's office, the therapy dog ignored all other patients to lie at Milo's feet. "He's got such a way with animals," Dr. Peterson remarked during his 1-year checkup. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah exchanged glances with David. If only the doctor knew. The real change came on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Sarah was doing laundry when she heard Milo talking in his room. Not babbling, talking, in full sentences. No, that's not right. The squirrel family lives in the oak tree. The robin's nest is in the maple." Sarah dropped the laundry basket. She crept to his door, peeking inside. Milo sat in the center of his room, surrounded by his stuffed animals. But they weren't arranged randomly. They were positioned in specific groups. The toy bears together, the birds separate, the dogs and cats in their own cluster. And Milo was moving them around, explaining something. The men came with the big machines, he said, his 13-month-old voice impossibly clear. They wanted to cut down the trees, but the bears remembered. They knew which trees had families. Sarah must have gasped because Milo looked up. For a moment, his eyes weren't baby blue. They were deeper, older, like looking into a forest pool. "Mama sad?" he asked, suddenly all toddler again. "No, baby, Mama's just surprised." She entered the room, kneeling beside him. "Who told you about the trees?" Milo held up his palm. The mark was glowing faintly. "They did. In dreams, they show me things." That night, after Milo was asleep, Sarah and David sat at their kitchen table with her laptop open. They'd been researching for weeks, finding only fragments, old Native American legends about spirit bears, scattered reports of children who could communicate with animals, folklore about forest guardians. "Look at this," David pointed to an article from 1962. A girl in Oregon who reportedly saved a logging town from a forest fire by leading all the wildlife to safety. She was 7 years old. Sarah pulled up another link. This one's from 1889. A boy in the Rockies who could speak the language of bears. He grew up to establish 3 national parks. They're all connected, David realized. All these children across different times and places, marked by the forest. Sarah's phone rang, startling them both. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Chen?" The voice was gravelly, urgent. "This is Henry Whitehorse. Well, I suppose you'd call me a colleague of your son's." Sarah put the phone on speaker. "I'm sorry, what? I know this sounds strange, but I was marked, like your boy, 60 years ago. The forest has been whispering about him, about what's coming." David leaned forward. "What's coming?" There was a pause. Development company called Titan Industries. They've bought up logging rights to old-growth forest, including the area where your son was marked. They plan to clear cut starting next month. Sarah's blood ran cold. The cabin area. And 20,000 acres around it. Some of the oldest trees in North America, home to countless species. The forest is distressed. It's calling its guardians. "But Milo's just a baby," Sarah protested. "Age doesn't matter to the forest," Henry said gently. "I was 3 when I was called. Your son is special, Mrs. Chen. He formed a bond of life and death. That's the strongest kind." After they hung up, Sarah and David stared at each other. How could their toddler fight a corporation? How could any of this be real? The answer came at 3 a.m. Sarah woke to find Milo's crib empty. Heart pounding, she rushed to the window. There, in their small backyard, stood their son in his pajamas. And he wasn't alone. Animals filled the yard, raccoons, opossums, cats, dogs. Even a deer had somehow gotten through their fence. They sat in perfect circles around Milo, who stood with his arms raised, the mark on his palm shining like a star. David joined her at the window. "Should we—" "No," Sarah whispered. "Look at him." Milo was speaking, but not in English. The sounds coming from his mouth were chirps, growls, whistles, and every animal responded. Heads turned, ears perked, tails swished in what looked like agreement. Then the deer stepped forward. It lowered its great head until its nose touched Milo's glowing palm. Light spread from the contact, rippling through the gathered animals like a wave. One by one, each animal approached Milo, touched the mark, and left. Soon, only the deer remained. It looked directly at Sarah and David's window, its eyes ancient and knowing, before bounding away into the night. Milo turned and toddled back inside as if nothing had happened. They found him in the kitchen, trying to climb into his high chair. "Hungry, Mama. The friends made me hungry." Sarah mechanically prepared a bottle while David secured the doors. Neither spoke until Milo was back in his crib, sleeping peacefully. "Pack a bag," David said finally. "We're going back to the cabin." "The development company. I know, but we can't fight this from here, and apparently—" He looked at their sleeping son. "Neither can he." They drove through the night, Milo unusually quiet in his car seat. As they entered the mountains, the mark on his palm began to glow steadily. He pressed his hand against the window, and Sarah saw animals in the forest keeping pace with their car, deer running alongside, birds flying overhead, shadows that might have been bears. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it, but the forest felt different, expectant, waiting. They'd barely unloaded the car when the visitors began arriving. Henry Whitehorse came first, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands that bore their own faint marks. "Been a long time since the forest called this strongly," he said, kneeling to Milo's level. "Hello, little brother." Milo studied him solemnly, then held out his marked hand. When they touched, both marks flared bright. Others followed. A park ranger named Maria Cruz, who'd been marked as a teenager. A veterinarian from Seattle whose gift had saved hundreds of animals. A young woman who ran a wildlife sanctuary, her arms scarred with the mark of claws that had chosen not to harm. By evening, 12 marked ones had gathered in the cabin. They ranged in age from 18 to 70, from all walks of life, but they shared the same look in their eyes, the weight of carrying the forest's trust. "Titan Industries has heavy equipment staged 10 miles north," Maria reported. "They plan to start cutting at dawn. 300 workers, police escort, the works." "The legal challenges failed," added Dr. Kim, the veterinarian. "Judge ruled in Titan's favor yesterday, said economic development trumps environmental concerns." Henry stood by the window, watching the darkening forest. "The trees are old here, sacred. Some have stood for 1,000 years. If they fall, the balance breaks," finished the young woman, Jenner. "The forest network disrupts. Migration patterns, water tables, climate regulation, it all connects through these ancient groves." Sarah held Milo tighter. "But what can we do? Stand in front of bulldozers? We have children to think about." Henry turned from the window. "Not us. Them." Through the glass, Sarah saw them. Bears, dozens of them, emerging from the tree line. And not just bears. Elk, mountain lions, wolves, eagles perched in branches. The clearing filled with wildlife, all facing the cabin, all waiting. "The marked are bridges," Henry explained. "When the forest is threatened, truly threatened, we don't fight. We translate. We help both sides communicate." "Communicate with bulldozers?" David asked skeptically. Henry smiled grimly. "With the people driving them. Most folks don't want to destroy something beautiful. They just don't see the beauty. Or they're scared of losing their jobs. Or they've been told lies about what matters." Milo squirmed in Sarah's arms. "Down, Mama. Need to talk." Against every instinct, she set him on the floor. He toddled to the door, reaching for the handle. "Let him," Henry said softly. "This is why he's here." David opened the door. Milo walked out onto the porch, and every animal in the clearing focused on him. The marked adults followed, forming a protective half-circle behind the toddler. Milo raised his glowing hand. When he spoke, it wasn't in any human language, but everyone understood. "They're coming to hurt our home," he said, and his voice carried the rustle of leaves, the bubble of streams, the whisper of wind through ancient branches. "But they don't know, they don't see. We have to show them. The mother bear from that first night stepped forward. She'd brought her cub, now larger but still recognizable. Other animals moved closer. A wolf with pups, an eagle with its mate, a doe with twin fawns. Families, Milo continued, and tears ran down Sarah's cheeks at the authority in her baby's voice. Just like theirs, homes, just like theirs, homes, just like theirs. Tomorrow, when the machines come, they need to see. The gathering lasted hours. Plans were made in languages Sarah couldn't understand, but somehow felt in her bones. The marked ones would position themselves between the equipment and the trees. The animals would stand with them, not threatening, just present, visible, real. No violence, Henry emphasized. That's not our way. We bear witness. We build bridges. We help them see what will be lost. As dawn approached, the animals dispersed to prepare. The marked ones grabbed what rest they could. Sarah and David sat with Milo between them, watching the sky lighten. "I don't want him in danger," Sarah whispered. David took her hand. "I don't think we have a choice. Whatever he is now, whatever he's becoming, it's bigger than us." Milo yawned, suddenly all toddler again. "Sleepy, Mama, but after nap we save the trees." Sarah kissed his forehead, right above where the mark pulsed with gentle light. "Yeah, baby, we save the trees." The first bulldozer appeared on the access road at 6 a.m. By then, the marked ones were in position. The animals had assembled, not hiding, but visible, calm, present. And in the center of it all, a 13-month-old boy with an ancient mark on his palm stood ready to speak for those who had no voice. The real test was about to begin. The convoy of Titan Industries vehicles came to a halt 50 yards from where the marked ones stood. The lead bulldozer's engine cut off, and an uneasy silence fell over the forest. Workers climbed down from their machines, hard hats in hand, staring at the scene before them. It wasn't what they'd expected. Instead of angry protesters with signs and chains, they saw families, human and animal families, standing together in the morning mist, bears with cubs, deer with fawns, people with children. All quiet, all watching. A man in a suit climbed out of a black SUV, Richard Titan himself, the company's CEO. His face went from confident to confused to something like fear. "What is this?" he demanded. "Some kind of publicity stunt." Henry Whitehorse stepped forward. "Mr. Titan, we're here to show you something, to help you see what your machines cannot." "I see trees," Titan snapped. "Resources, jobs for 300 workers, economic growth for the region." That's when Milo spoke. The toddler's voice shouldn't have carried across the distance, but it did. It filled the clearing like wind through leaves, like water over stone. "Look harder." Titan's eyes widened. Several workers stepped back. The child's voice wasn't natural. It was the forest itself speaking. Milo raised his marked hand, and the glow spread, not just from his palm, but from all the marked ones. The light connected them like a web, then expanded to touch the animals, the trees, the very ground. And suddenly, everyone could see. The forest revealed itself. Not just trees and underbrush, but a living network. They saw the underground fungal networks connecting root systems, sharing nutrients and information. They saw the 1,000-year-old grandmother trees that anchored entire ecosystems. They saw the watersheds that provided clean water to 5 cities, the carbon being stored, the oxygen being produced. But more than that, they saw the stories. The bear cub that Milo had saved appeared in the vision, grown now but still bearing faint scars from the rope. Its children played in these very trees. The eagles nested in the giants scheduled for cutting had returned to the same spot for 15 generations. The wolf pack had ancient paths that crisscrossed the development zone, paths they'd followed since before humans walked this land. "My God," whispered one of the bulldozer operators. The visions shifted. Now they saw the future Titan Industries promised: stumps and erosion, mudslides and dried streams. Empty land that would take 500 years to recover, if ever. They saw their own grandchildren asking why the forests were gone, why the animals had nowhere to live. Richard Titan fell to his knees. In the vision, he saw himself as a child, camping with his father in these same woods. Remembered the awe he'd felt looking up at trees that seemed to touch the sky. When had he forgotten? When had profit become more important than wonder? But Milo wasn't finished. The toddler walked forward, his parents close behind. He stopped in front of Titan and held out his small hand. Not the marked one, just a regular baby hand with dimpled knuckles. "You can choose," Milo said in his impossible, ancient child's voice. "Destroy or protect. Take or give. The forest remembers both." Titan looked at the offered hand, then at his workers. They were all watching, waiting. Some had tears on their faces. Others stared at the animals that had crept closer, not threatening, just present, witnessing. The contracts. Titan started weakly. "Break them," said one of his own foremen. "I've got kids, Mr. Titan. I want them to see this place. Want them to know we've protected it." "The board will sue." "Let them," said another worker. "Some things matter more than money." A massive grizzly approached. Not the mother from that night, but an ancient male with graying muzzle. It stood on hind legs, towering over everyone, then gently placed one enormous paw on Titan's shoulder. The touch was light, but the message was clear. Choose wisely. Titan took Milo's hand. The moment their skin touched, Titan gasped. Later, he'd say he felt the heartbeat of every living thing in the forest. Felt their trust, their hope, their faith that humans could still make the right choice. "Pack it up," he said hoarsely. "We're leaving." "Sir?" His assistant looked stunned. Titan stood, still holding Milo's hand. "I said, pack it up, all of it, and call legal. We're converting this entire purchase to a conservation trust. Protected land, forever." The clearing erupted. Workers cheered. Animals made their own celebrations, howls and calls and chirps. The marked ones smiled, exhaustion and relief mingling on their faces. Sarah scooped up Milo, who suddenly seemed very small and tired. "You did it, baby, you did it." But Milo was looking at the forest edge. There, barely visible in the morning shadows, stood Alara. The woman who was more than human nodded once, approval and pride in her ancient eyes. Then she faded back into the forest, her duty done. The aftermath moved quickly. True to his word, Titan restructured the entire deal. Instead of clear-cutting, his company would manage ecotourism. The workers would have jobs maintaining trails, guiding tours, protecting rather than destroying. The old growth would stand for future generations. The marked ones dispersed back to their lives, but they stayed connected. A network of guardians, ready when the forest called. Henry Whitehorse started a foundation to identify and support newly marked children. Dr. Kim established wildlife corridors connecting protected lands. And the Chen family? They bought a house at the forest's edge. Close enough to visit the cabin. Close enough for Milo to maintain his connection. As he grew, his abilities grew with him. By age 5, he was helping rangers track injured animals. By 10, he was testifying before Congress about habitat protection. A child whose words carried the weight of the wild itself. But that's getting ahead of the story. On that morning, as the Titan Industries convoy retreated down the mountain road, Sarah sat on the cabin porch with her sleeping son. David stood behind them, hands on her shoulders. The forest had returned to its normal sounds, birds calling, wind in branches, the distant splash of a creek. "It's not over," David said quietly. "There'll be other threats, other battles." Sarah looked at Milo's palm. The mark had faded again, looking once more like an unusual birthmark. But she knew it would glow when needed, knew her son would answer when called. "I know," she said, "but today we won. Today they saw." In the forest, the mother bear watched from the shadows. Her cub, saved by human kindness, grown strong and healthy, played in the underbrush. The debt between species had been paid forward. The bridge between worlds held firm. As the sun climbed higher, painting the ancient trees in gold and green, the cabin door opened. Henry Whitehorse emerged with coffee and stories of other marked ones, other saves, other times when compassion trumped greed. They sat together, the old guardian and the new family, and talked about the future. About teaching Milo to balance his gift with a normal childhood. About the responsibility that came with being chosen. About the hope that lived in every protected tree, every saved creature, every child who saw the world through eyes of wonder rather than profit. That night, Milo dreamed. In his dreams, he ran with bears through moonlit forests. He flew with eagles over pristine valleys. He swam with salmon up clear rivers. And everywhere he went, the mark on his palm pulsed with warm light. A reminder that some bonds couldn't be broken, some duties couldn't be ignored, and some love was strong enough to bridge any gap between worlds. The forest slept peacefully, knowing its guardians, both old and impossibly young, stood watch. And in a crib in a house at the mountain's edge, a little boy smiled in his sleep, his marked hand glowing softly in the darkness. The legend of the baby who saved a bear had become something more. It had become a promise, a covenant, a hope that humans and nature could still find harmony, one small act of courage at a time. And sometimes, in the early morning mist, if you knew where to look, you could see them, the marked ones and their animal allies keeping watch, protecting, bridging, ensuring that the old magic would pass to new generations, that the forests would endure, and that love would always be stronger than fear. The beginning disguised as an ending. The child who spoke for those without voices. The mark that